Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card uses the Altenew set called Persian Motifs. I've got this flower and this flower that I'm going to be using. I'm also using the Luminarte Silk Glazes, which I used last week as a background, and this time I'm going to watercolor with them. They are water soluble, and I'm going to open it here so you can see the texture. It's like a creamy silk, and it's got, sorry it's a little blurry, I got too close to the camera, but it's got mica in it, so it has a really pretty shimmery look. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my Misty and I'm going to arrange my stamps on my Strathmore watercolor paper. This is 90 pound. And with the Misty I can stamp them all at the same time, which is great, saves me a lot of time. And I'm going to ink it up with some versafine black onyx ink, which is a pigment ink so it stays wet for longer and it allows me to clear emboss on top of it. And I always find that clear embossing or any kind of embossing really helps with watercolor. It helps you stay in the lines, especially when you have thin lines like these stems are. So I'm going to heat this to set it, and then I can get started on my watercolor. The first thing I'm going to do is lay down a very thin layer of color so that it's very light. These paints are water soluble, and so as a result they dilute significantly with water. So even with just a little bit of water you're going to get a lot less color. So what I'm essentially doing here is laying down all the highlights. So all the lightest parts of my petal are already going to be down on the paper, if that makes sense. So there's really no technique here. I'm just using the water that's coming out of this Ranger detailer brush and covering all the petals with the same amount of color in all parts of the petal. So I'm really just trying to get a base here, and because these paints layer really well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this light layer dry, and then I'll apply my shadows on top of it. And it's permanent once it goes down, so the bottom layer won't be affected by any additional layers I put on top. And you just need a tiny little bit of color, which is why I'm just using the lid. I don't even need any more than that. Now I did find that there was a lot of water coming out of this brush because I just refilled it, so I'm drying it off as much as I can because on my shadow layer I want very dry paint. I really don't want much water because I want it to be nice and vibrant. I'm pretty methodical when I color flowers. I do one petal at a time and I do them all the same way. So first I'm applying color to that center line. See where I'm just to the right of it. I'm doing some color, not to the left, just to the right. And then I'll apply color to the shadow, which is where there's a petal in front of it, there will be a shadow cast on that petal. So I'm also going to color that shadow area. And I usually also color in the inside, the very kind of deepest part of the petal. And the color is diluting a little bit because water is coming out of my pen, and you'll see that I'm going to switch techniques here in just a little bit because I want really dry paint because I want the dark areas to be super dark and the light areas to be light. So here I am switching to a paintbrush. So this is a very thin paintbrush, and I found that the trick with these paints when you do your shadow areas and you want really vibrant color is to use a moist brush, because a dry brush is a little too dry, so you're not getting a very good blend or spread of color. But when you have a moist brush, it really makes the color blend out and go nice and smooth on your cardstock. So you see I put a little bit of water on my craft mat there. I'm going to pick it up sporadically but not very often, just when my brush gets a little bit too dry. But for the most part I'm going to dip it in the water, I'll wipe it off on a tissue, and that's when I'm going to use just kind of a moist kind of feel to the brush. Okay, so I'm doing the same exact thing on the second petal here. I'm just coloring to the right of that middle line, and that kind of shows that the petal is sort of creasing in the middle. And then I'll do the base of the petal, so toward the center where the stem is, and blend that out, and then where it casts a shadow behind that petal in front of it. So right here, kind of, and I go up the side a little bit too, just to blend it out. So I'm going to speed this up because it's all basically the same technique on each and every petal. I think it's fun to watch it in fast motion because it really comes together so quickly. But talking about my brush again, when I first did the first version of this card, I used my detailer brush for the entire card. I never switched to a dry brush, and that's because my tube had very little water in it. And after I finished the card, I filled my Ranger detailer brush with water, and when you have a full tube of water it really comes out a lot faster. So kind of the lesson learned with this watercoloring is that the more control you have over the water, the better. When you have too much water, it becomes a lot more difficult to get your colors the shade that you want them. Alright, so after I'm done with all these petals, I'm actually going to go back in, and where that middle line is in the petal, where it creases down in the deepest part, I'm adding just another dark touch of dry color, just so it adds more shadow and more depth to the flower, and just makes it look a little more real. Now for the rest of the blue flowers, I went ahead and just did the whole thing at once. So I did my all over light color on all of the entire flower, and then as I was doing that, it was drying and I could go back and do the shadow areas. So I already did the shadow area of that one on the right hand side, that little tiny one. It wasn't very interesting, so I thought I'd skip to this bigger one. But as you can see, I'm using the same exact method I used on all the other ones, and I try to keep it consistent because then I think it's easier to remember. And when you focus on one petal at a time, it just seems a lot more manageable, and then somehow at the end they just all come together and it looks really good. So anyway, I'm going to speed up this coloring for the next minute or so. I'll turn the music up and then I'll be back. Alright, I'm going to lift it up here so you can see how vibrant this is. Watch me pick it up and you can see how dark the dark really is. When it's laying flat on the table, the shimmery from the mica really fades it out a little bit for the camera, but when you pick it up and look at it at an angle, you can really see how much depth these flowers have. Alright, so now I'm moving on to my green areas, and again, all over color, using just the lid. I switched to a Stampin' Up! Aqua Painter because there's a little less water that comes out of these typically, and so it gives you a little bit more control. I'm doing the same exact thing with these green leaves. I've got my little drop of water to re-moisten my brush whenever it gets a little bit too dry, but I'm adding shadow areas with the dry paint. So I'm going to speed this part up for about a minute and a half or so, and I'll be back. And here is the final flower. Now I wanted to add one more step. This is a Zig Clean Color Real Brush Marker in light gray, number 91, and I wanted these flowers to pop just a little bit on my cardstock. So what I'm doing is I'm coloring the edge in gray. Now I'm not coloring all edges, so I'm not going around the whole thing, because when you think about something that has a shadow, it doesn't have a shadow, the same size shadow all around it. Especially if your light is coming from the right where mine is. So I'm just kind of imagining where a shadow might cast itself from this flower, and I'm just coloring those areas with the gray. These markers blend so easily, so all I'm going to do is take my aqua painter and I'm just going to color the edge of these markers, and you can see how it just really quickly smooths itself out so you don't see any lines whatsoever. Now if you wanted to have a deeper shadow, you could use a darker color, or you can color a little further out. You could use less water to blend it out. I just wanted a very kind of light hint of a shadow behind it. And so I'm going to go through and just color all of these edges, and then I'll be done. And then I'll do the same exact thing on the other side. And I'm all done here, so you can see when I pick it up again how vibrant these colors look when you're not looking at them through the glimmer. So I got a little bit of blue there on the edge. I don't know if you could see it, but I'm going to take a sanding block, and because watercolor paper has multiple layers to it, you can use a sanding block on it so easily, and the spot comes right off and you can't even tell on the cardstock. So you can see how it completely disappeared. Okay, so I'm going to use some Hero Arts black note cards, and they're white on the inside, and I love these cards. I'm going to put some ATG tape runner on the back, and then I'll grab my Misty. I'm going to put my card base in the upper right hand corner, and then I'll take my watercolor panel and I'm going to put it right there in the corner. Sorry, that's cut off a little bit. I'm going to leave a little bit of black on the left hand side because I wanted to balance that out with the sentiment. So I kind of wanted to have two things on either side that match up. So the sentiment and the black strip. Anyway, that's the card for today. You can see how shimmery that is. I have a close-up on my blog so you can see it. And I hope you'll try out these paints. I think they're really fun and they're so beautiful. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.